Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte Clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA, FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
It's easy to get lost in the latest true crime podcast or your favorite binge-worthy show. But what about your own story? That's the most important story of all, and therapy helps you write it. BetterHelp Therapy is 100% online and designed to be convenient and flexible enough to squeeze in between the next episode on your list. Get started today at betterhelp.com/pause for 10% off your first month.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Gabriel Bier Gislason. Gislason. There we go. I tried. I'm so sorry. I freeze every time.
Really, both were excellent. Both were very acceptable.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. But Gabriel's feature film debut, Attachment, is streaming now on Shudder. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. We're really excited to chat with you both about your movie and the pick that you brought with you today because I just can't wait. Anyway, before we do, I don't want to get too far ahead. Before we do talk about your choice of movie, let's take it to your debut film, Attachment. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the film?
Yeah, sure. So it's my first feature. It is a Danish production, although it's mostly in English. It is about two women who have like a meet cute and fall in love in Copenhagen. One of them is a Danish washed-up actor, and the other one is a sort of visiting academic. And they fall in love very quickly and have a whirlwind romance. And then when the English academic has a mysterious seizure and an accident, she has to return back to London, where she's from. And the Danish actor and our lead decides to follow her, to follow love to London. And there she meets her new downstairs neighbor, who turns out to be her girlfriend's seemingly very religious Jewish mom. And the mom is not the friendliest person in the world to her. And when she starts noticing weird stuff happening at night, she starts to suspect that the mom is up to no good. And then a variety of things ensue. So how did you, because you also wrote this, how did you come up with this idea? Because you're tackling like Jewish traditions as well as a queer romance. And I remember when I first watched this movie, I was like, oh, I love how this is starting, because it's basically a queer romantic comedy that ends up finding supernatural in a way.
And so I'm curious how you came up with this idea, or what led you to it.
It was sort of just like a confluence of different like ideas I had going on in my head, mixed with some real life stories that Josephine, who plays the lead, Maya, told me. So basically, sort of in the time leading up to me writing it, sort of, I'd had this sort of like desire to make a kind of irreverent Jewish horror movie. Like I'd seen, because I'd grown up seeing all these great horror films that kind of drew on certain kind of like Christian ideas. I mean, arguably you could say that like Dracula, which we'll touch on later, does that too, right? But like, you know, I mean, so the obvious picks are things like The Exorcist or The Omen, like that were both really freaky and really spooky, but also had a kind of playful relationship with the religions that they were working with. And like, you know, they would sort of take the parts that worked for the story, and then they would discard the things that didn't and kind of fill in the blanks themselves. And it was just a kind of that playful relationship to the traditions I wanted to see someone do with Judaism, because, you know, I'd seen a lot of like, obviously there's a lot of Jewish comedies, there's a lot of Jewish films that have a lot, sort of a great reverence towards the traditions and some kind of educational aspirations, which I think are great. But also I wanted to see someone who just kind of like fucked around a bit and had a bit of fun with it, because there's also a lot of that in Jewish tradition and in the horror space, because the horror space is, I think, again, as we'll maybe touch on, really hospitable for fun and playing around as well. But all that said, even though I felt like there was this really deep bench of just like mythological beings to draw from, I didn't have any like specific story to kind of latch it onto. So it was more just like a mood or a world I wanted to be in. Okay. And then independently of that, Josephine, who plays the lead, is one of my closest friends, and we've been friends since high school, where we, we used to make really terrible theater together, including, we wrote, when we were like 15 or 16, we and some of our friends wrote and produced this play that was like Shakespeare mixed with Survivor, mixed with like X Factor or something, or like whatever, like was it is one of the worst things ever made. Like I can't even conceive of how we thought of something that bad. But like, anyway,
it sounds amazing. Honestly,
obsessed.
I mean, it was. I'm sure it was in its own right kind of amazing, but it was terrible. But anyways, we used to like do a bunch of fun stuff like that. And then she went off to go to drama school. I, after a while, decided to pursue film and went to film school. And then as she was finishing drama school and I was wrapping up film school, we went out and got super wasted. And then she told me these stories, because I'd been living in New York and London for a while, and she'd been in Denmark. So I'd like missed a couple of her girlfriends while I'd been away. And she told me about one girlfriend. And one of the reasons I'd missed her was that they'd kind of had like a bad breakup, her and her ex. And that was because that like they'd both been between apartments. And the ex had been like, oh, you know, my mom has lots of room. We could just move in with her for a bit, just for like a month, and it'll be chill.
Oh no!
And she did, and it was not at all.
I love like women, not to assume like queer couples and U-Haul lesbians. Not to like ascribe that to Josephine, but are my fucking favorite. Like just making the best decisions that are definitely not going to lead to disaster.
Precisely. And I mean, when she told me the story, I was like, wow, you were like walking right into a moving train, weren't you? Like that is crazy. And then she told me these stories, and it was just, they were so funny and so over the top. And like, we were, you know, again, completely fucked up. And I was like, I am going to write you a film. And it shall be a huge hit, and you shall be a star, and you shall thank me later. And Josephine did very much become a star with like none of my work, because I was still writing this movie while she became a star. But anyway, so like that seemed so funny to me. But again, this was like weird things. Like there was like a premise, but it was like looking for a story. And then the Jewish thing started kind of scratching in the back of my head. And I was like, oh, you know, like there's that whole sort of the trope of the Jewish mom and the stereotype of how the Jewish mom is super overbearing and super domineering. And there's always this weird feeling underneath it all that like, it's all a matter of life or death. And I was like, oh, okay, but what if you made a movie where like, it kind of is all about life or death? Like, and like, that's like the shtick of it, is like all of these tropes are actually founded in something really deep and dark. And when that clicked into place, then that structure with those three women in the house, like while the specific stories that Josephine told me didn't really work because it didn't really work with the Jewishness of it all, the idea of the three of them stuck in this building together just really worked well as a way of exploring that. And so somehow all of those threads kind of came together, and I started writing what became Attachment.
Holy, that's so wild that it's like quasi inspired by true events. I won't say a true story, but
Well, and I think to this day, like, Josephine is pretty relieved that I took out the specifics because she, like, I think otherwise she'd be getting, like, angry texts from her ex and the mom about, like, like now, they don't really know that it's them necessarily. Yeah.
Right.
Well, you also have Sophie Grabol, I believe is her, like, in this film, and I love her. What was it like working with her and having her as part of the film as the quote unquote crazy mom?
Well, I actually, I've known her for most of my life because I grew up in the Danish film industry. Both my parents are in film. So I knew her, I've known her since I was a kid. She actually would, she like read stories to me to get me to fall asleep a couple times when I was growing up. And, as a bit on set, she would sometimes yell out, instead of yelling out my name across the set, she would yell out like the Danish equivalent of sweetie. Just to kind of like, both to kind of like to like mess with me a bit, but also I found it quite cute. It was so in terms of, like, I already had a prior relationship with Sophie, but I'd never worked with her. But I wrote the part with her in mind, not because we knew each other, but because I wanted to make sure. Basically, I wanted this character to be really inscrutable and really hard to place. Mm-hmm. And for that, I needed someone who, like, even when they play really kind of like complicated or difficult or unpleasant characters, I needed someone who always had this like really deep sense of humanity, and that Sophie has in like everything she does, because there are other great actresses of Sophie's generation, but I had this feeling like, they will either be like, they will be too mean, like it will be too transparent that there's something else going on, or they will be like they're not going to nail that like awfulness that needs to be at other times, and that's going to be hard to kind of get the balance right. And with her, I just knew, like, no matter how annoying or difficult or frustrating or outright unpleasant I made her, she would have this real kind of inner humanity to her. And so I wrote the role specifically with her in mind, and then fortunately she said yes. And then I think she just had a ton of fun because she'd never actually gotten to play someone who was that like awful at times as she is, like, so she got to really relish, like, there's a bit of scenery chewing going on, and she really got to really enjoy that.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
And we just had a blast. I'm writing a film with her in the lead at the moment, like another Danish film specifically for her, because we had so much fun working together.
That's amazing.
That's so cool.
She's so good in this.
I think she's incredible in it, really. I'm not trying to pat my own, like, she just does an amazing job in it.
I always love to also hear about where you find the locations, because I mean, most of this takes place, at least like the back half / a little more than that, take place in the one apartment essentially. How did you find that apartment, or is it an amalgamation of apartments? Like, how did you find that location? Because I love the way it's set up.
Quite the anecdote attached to that. No pun intended. So basically, originally we wanted to shoot all the London stuff in London. Yeah. And then, like, it started feeling like, okay, that's actually going to be tricky on this budget because it's a pretty low budget movie, and it's made. The Danish Film Institute has a first feature scheme, which is like for people who have finished film school. It's like, all right, apply to it and let's help you make a first feature and get off the ground, which is this amazing thing. And
that's cool.
It also doesn't come with a lot of money for good reason, and they don't, again, for good reason, let people do co-productions on it because they want to keep the playing field even, so that if you have a project, like they want everyone to have sort of an equal opportunity with that first feature. It's very Scandinavian and social democratic, and I'm all for it.
Hey, love that shit though.
Absolutely. I entirely genuinely think it's pretty amazing. It was, I went to film school in the US, and I very quickly decided that the first thing I would do when I finished was go home and apply for this fund.
Are you a dual citizen? Not to like be weird, but like, are you a dual citizen? Oh, you're Danish. Are you Danish?
Born and raised Danish, yeah.
Oh, cool.
But I lived in London and New York throughout the entirety of my 20s. And then,
okay, cool.
Long story, wound up back in Copenhagen. And now I'm sort of between Copenhagen and Vancouver at the moment. All a long, complicated story. Anyway.
Wow. Anyway, sorry. Derailed the question.
So because of these kind of like somewhat limited funds, London was already seeming a bit dicey. And then when COVID hit, it was like, okay, well, we're just not going to London. But the thing was that, like, because it's drawing on these things from like Yiddish folklore and Yiddish tradition, it still kind of needed to be set in a Hasidic environment to sort of fit with the world. And there just isn't one in Copenhagen. So, I still had to choose, like, it still had to be set in a city that had that community. And I wanted to be set in a city that I knew. So it would either be London or New York, because those are the only two cities I've lived in that had this community. So we decided, okay, we'll do London all the same, but we'll We'll do like a day or two of exteriors. We can just about afford that. And then we'll do all the interiors. We'll find a house in Denmark that can double as a London house, and we'll make that work. Okay, so me and the production designer, who has also lived in London for a long time, we go searching for it. And it takes us forever. And finally, very, very close to production, we find a house. And it just about works. Like, it's not perfect, but it's with enough kind of finagling, we can make it work. And we spend the most of our pre-production, which is, it's like really priceless time that you have, figuring out how exactly to swing it. And then 2.5 weeks before we go on set, the homeowner calls us and says that she's just discovered that we're making a horror film. And so we cannot shoot in her house because, and she means this seriously, she's worried that we will curse her home.
Oh,
yeah. Like, so I mean, obviously I've promptly go and curse her home out of spite and then go back to the production offices. But we're screwed. And so, because we have no other option and we're about to go on set, like in 2.5 weeks, with what little bit of money we have left in the budget, the production design team manages to build the whole thing in a studio in 2.5 weeks.
No, really?
So everything in those London apartments is on a studio. And it was so last minute that the first day we showed up to shoot in them, there were still like cracks in the walls where the lights were flooding in through. They were like kind of like quickly patching them up because they just had to, I mean, what they did was amazing, but they had to do it in no time.
Holy shit.
Wait, that is so fucking impressive and terrifying.
It really is.
Making movies is terrifying.
It was, I mean, those 2 weeks alone probably shaved off about 7 years of my life. Like,
probably. I can imagine.
It was crazy. And it was stuff like, it was still, I'm so impressed with what they did. And we're still doing it on so cheap. Like, we couldn't afford windows. We just we managed to scrounge like one stained glass window. Which means that every time we had to turn the camera in the hallway, we had to move the window. So we'd like turn the camera, like, someone get the window, or like move the window back there.
Oh my God.
There's one front door that we would move like up and down the steps.
That's fucking amazing.
It was nuts. It was such a crazy time. But yeah, so anyway, so in terms of how I pick locations, basically through sheer bad luck, I guess is.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Sorry, I am glad I asked though, because that is really, that's really,
wow.
And I mean, you can't tell watching it. You can't tell that you had to carry doors and windows and move them around. Holy cow.
No. I mean, fortunately, no one's been able to spot it because they and the camera and lighting department just did such a good job of working with it. But it was crazy. I mean, it was even to the point where like the other thing we had to move around was, basically, they couldn't we couldn't afford to build a set like particularly like far up. Like it was a very tall set because every bit of material you use to build the walls costs money.
Right.
But we also couldn't afford ceilings.
Oh, okay.
And the tricky thing was then if you shoot on a lens that's wider than say a 35 millimeters, then you start seeing over the ceiling. So the best we could do was the production design team. I mean, these people were just heroes. Like not all heroes wore capes, but they sometimes have like an electric drill. Like. They just built a huge square of white fabric, and then we would move it around with these like giant sticks. So like, okay, we're moving the camera this way now, and they would like move the ceiling like a little bit over so they would cover the top. And it was quite the adventure. Yeah.
The joys of indie filmmaking, huh?
Oh yes.
Good Lord.
A lot of stuff to learn on your first feature.
Goodness. I mean, it makes you prepared for the next one, right?
Hopefully on the ceiling for your next movie.
Yeah, no. I definitely plan to have it written into my deal. Like, I insist on having ceilings at all time.
And more than one door and window. I need to have a fully furnished home to shoot in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh my
nuts.
goodness!
Wow.
So you mentioned that your parents are in the film industry.
Yeah.
Is that correct? So
yeah.
Is that how you got interested in film, or what was your journey to become a filmmaker?
It was, and some of this will weirdly tie into Dracula later. So I grew up in film. Both my parents are filmmakers. My mom is a fairly well-known film director called Gabriel Bier. And my dad is an editor and documentarian called Thomas Gislason. And they were in film, throughout my entire childhood. And so I watched a ton of films with them, and I was very exposed to film generally through them. but the third person who, well, two things actually. So my dad got his start in the industry as a movie projectionist when he was a teen. And the few films he projected, and he would project them over and over again, were Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, which sort of ties into...
Yep.
So I watched them a lot growing up as well, because my dad was obsessed with them. So was his mom, my grandmother, who was like my third parent. She raised me as much as they did, really. And she was obsessed with film. She had nothing to do with film. She was a public school teacher, but she since she was a kid and like growing up in the 40s and being young in the 50s, she just loved movies. And so she showed me a ton of movies growing up, also including all the Mel Brooks movies, but also she loved MGM musicals. And as a result, so do I now. And I saw Singing in the Rain for the first time when I was 7, and I fucked up my shoulder because I tried to run up the wall like Donald O'Connor does. And I fell and busted my shoulder in my grandmother's apartment.
Oh man.
But yeah, so I grew up around film, but I wasn't necessarily that interested in pursuing it until like my sort of mid-20s or early 20s. Not because, I think some people think that way because of like a chip on their shoulders. I think I was more just like, oh, I've seen a lot of this stuff. I wonder what else might be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a while I thought I was going to try to be a journalist, but I'm notoriously bad with deadlines, and that didn't seem to work very well together. And then I wanted to write fiction, so I wrote a number of short stories and tried my hand at a novel, but they are very long. And
they sure are.
They are very long and difficult to write. And then I wrote some plays, not just the aforementioned bad high school plays, but when I was living in London and I was studying English Lit, I wrote some plays that I staged with some friends at like tiny theaters in London, and they were not very good, but I learned a lot from them. And then at a certain point, I think it was like 23 or something, I suddenly had this idea that I was like, I remember even thinking like, oh shit, I think this is a short film. Fuck. I think this might be a short. And I had really made films before, but again, Denmark with its wonderful public funding for the arts has or at least back then, I think it's slightly more complicated now, but back then it had a specific funding scheme for short films, for people who wanted to try their hand at a short film, where they gave you a bit of money and they had a bunch of equipment for you to go out with. And so I wrote a script.
That's so
and
cool.
I applied. Yeah, it's great. It's so amazing. I wrote a script and put together like a lookbook and applied for the financing, and I got it. And then I made my first short film, which was like a riff on a wedding comedy, like a wedding comedy where the bride never shows up. But I made that, and like my first day on set, I had this feeling of like, oh man, this kind of feels like home in a way that I had a very, like, you know, and this wasn't about like, it's not like I had like a natural knack for it or anything. Like this wasn't a reflection on how good it was, because it was the first time I was directing anything. So I wasn't that good. But there was just something about, like, I understood like the structure and the system of it, and like the language. It was really nice to speak it, even if I didn't speak it yet fully. And like,
right.
It felt very right. And so after making that, like I tried to handle a couple of those shorts, and then I applied to NYU for their graduate film program. And I got in there and I moved to New York, and I went to film school there and, made Attachment, and now I'm here. That's as far on the journey as I've come.
Wow.
Hell yeah. So how did you get introduced to horror specifically? Were you said to watch a lot of movies, were your parents at all into horror movies, or your grandmother?
No, actually they weren't. I mean, they showed me like the class, like stuff like The Shining, right? Or like the sort of the ones that are like, that have sort of like
the benchmarks kind of.
Yeah, exactly. The ones that have sort of transcended into sort of general classics, or like that are on the sort of the movies to watch before you die kind of things. But the sort of the horror films that I fell in love with, I sort of discovered on my own. I think once I was at my parents were taking me to work a lot. And once my dad was editing something, and he took me to the editing suites, and, you know, as a kid, you'd get bored. And so they'd have little movie screening rooms. And usually there would be some like very kind patient assistant who would take me, the child, and like, here, is there a movie you'd like to watch? And we'll put it on. And in this case, I had like a very undiscriminating one where I pointed to the Army of Darkness, like VHS cover or whatever. And I was like, can I watch that? And they're like, sure, whatever. And that I watched was like, oh, this is sick. And then I told my cousin, who was 8 years older and, you know, of sort of much more, you know, worldly and wizened man at 17 or 18 or something. I told him about this crazy movie I'd watched, and it's like, oh, well, you should check out the other movies in that series. And then I watched Evil Dead 2, and it like scared the shit out of me. But also, I totally fell in love with it. And when I finally got like, I remember, I think must have been 11 or 12 or something, I spent my allowance on, there's like one store in Copenhagen that would import US DVDs, like Region 1 DVDs.
Okay.
And I went in there and I remember pre-ordering, because they told me it was coming, the steel case version of Evil Dead 2, and like brought that home, and it was like my most like hallowed possession. And I'd already seen it once, and I just like watched it on repeat for days. And like I think they even later did the same thing with with Evil Dead 1, where it was like in like a weird like latex like Necronomicon edition. You'd open it up and it was a books with a disc in there.
Yep, I had that too. And if you put that book in the refrigerator or something, it's supposed to feel like flesh or something weird.
Oh, really?
It was like the marketing thing. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, so I think that was my way in, and then just I think horror in a weird way, because I was exposed to so many movies, like horror was the one genre I kind of got to discover a bit on my own, because my parents didn't have a relationship to it. And there was something, I think, falling for horror that around that time in like the early 2000s, where everyone was just like, they were all like pumping out these special edition DVDs of various classics. And like, so also like, I think I got Suspiria, the special edition of Suspiria for my bar mitzvah. Like, you know, like I was like you like really kind of just like, oh man, using every special occasion to get like some new special edition of some like classic horror film. And yeah, so that's how I got into horror originally. And then I think the fact that I was then at film school around the time of like, I hate the term elevated horror, but you know, sort of whatever, since A24 started thinking of like putting a sticker in front of a horror movie, you know, like that whole being in film school and being in this place where you're constantly thinking about filmmaking and the mechanics of filmmaking and how it works at a time where the genre is having this kind of huge, big marketed renaissance
of sorts. Yeah.
I think it really made me, because I got into horror before I decided to make films myself, that was when I started appreciating horror for what it does cinematically. Like, I really think it is, maybe except for musicals, like my other great love, like the most cinematic genre there exists, because it has this like reliance on the basic building blocks of cinema, which is like, where is the camera and when, where's the cut and when, like, what are we showing you and what are we choosing not to show you? And that is the basics of cinema, and I feel like there are a few genres that rely on it as heavily as horror. And it was really fun to like think about that while I was in film school and thinking about these things just in general, which is why I think I wound up trying to make a type of horror film for my first feature.
So what I'm hearing though is we have horror, we have musicals. When are we going to get a horror musical from you?
Oh man, the moment I meet the raging psychopath who will finance it, because that is that is a dream, and also a very expensive dream.
yeah.
Don't worry, it's in there. Like I'm hoping for it. Yeah.
I'm trying to like what's the word? Make it happen. What's
manifest
it? Yeah, I'm trying to manifest it.
We're manifesting.
I appreciate it. I suspect I need all the like karmic support I can get for that project to happen.
I'll be there first to buy the ticket, because musicals, horror movies, comedy, like all my bailiwick. So I'm there for that.
I feel like it'll work together genuinely. I mean, like Phantom of the Paradise is one of my favorite films of all time, and I feel like that is a very good example of like.
Have you seen Anna and the Apocalypse?
No, wait, what?
Oh my god, it is a zombie musical, and it is so good, and it is like so sweet and funny, and it's a Christmas horror, and it's incredible. If you love horror musicals, you gotta watch Anna and the Apocalypse.
You gotta watch it.
Okay,
it's so good.
That is very, very much at the top of my list now. Anna and
the Apocalypse.
Anna and the Apocalypse. Okay, all right. Well, done. All right, that sounds wonderful.
Zombies and singing about leaving your small town and all that good stuff, you know. So
I love this. That sounds great. So,
but now as an adult, have there been any movies that recently that you've seen that have really scared you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Hereditary really,
always, hell yeah,
messed me up.
Take a drink, listeners.
Most people say Hereditary.
That one comes up
for
a lot.
Good reason.
Yeah, I think Ari Aster really, there was something so deeply unsettling about it, but it's also the way in which, like, even though it's sort of at once like really gloriously over the top, I mean, not as much as Midsommar's later, which I think I love even more, but isn't as scary.
Interesting.
But you know, for all it's like kind of it's such a wild movie, it's still at the same time strangely restrained in how much it holds back from actually freaking you out. And then you have that wide shot of the bedroom that night, which is just, and it was, I don't know about you guys, I saw it at BAM in New York in a packed movie theater.
Yep.
And it was this weird thing. It was like, it was quiet, and then someone, oh my God. And then someone, oh Jesus Christ. And then everyone's like, what's going on? And then you see it and you're like, fuck. And that, I mean, again, speaking to like, how cinematic a genre it is, right? Like that is like, speaks to his specific knowledge of the effect from cutting from one shot size to the next and how he lights it and what you'll look at and where in the frame. It's so masterful.
It's the best use of light in horror too, I think. And like shadows, it's just like, it's so good. It's so good. And he is just not well. Like, his short films are wild, like, and I mean that with respect, but like his short films are unhinged too. But
I saw one of them. We have a couple of, I don't know Ari, but we have a couple of mutual friends. And they showed one of them to me before Hereditary came out. Cause they knew him from back in the day. And I was like, wow, this is bananas.
Which is the strange thing about the Johnsons, where the son rapes the dad.
Yeah, that one. And I saw it, I was like, wow, that is nuts. And also like, when is this man's first feature coming out? I'm very eager to see it. Yeah, and then shortly thereafter, yeah.
But I kind of jumped the gun actually a little bit. But so do you get scared easily? Like, were you scared easily as a kid? Okay, and you get scared easily now? Yeah. Cool.
And I get scared easily now. Yeah. I will sit, I mean, my wife and I went to see Barbarian in, I think like March or April or something. And she was scared, but she still laughed whenever she turned to look at me because I was sitting like...
I love
those
that.
First 45 minutes, I was just like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. You gotta
the trademark, trademark like this, trying like to hide
exactly.
it. Yeah,
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, I've decided, I realize that this podcast, I should maybe not just be purely visual, but like, I've decided that there's something far more grown up about just like, holding your hands in front of your face as though you're thinking, when really you're just fully blocking out the screen.
I'm definitely very deep in thought and not terrified of whatever is going to pop up in front of me. This is not terrifying
to me at all.
I'm just contemplating the artistic merits of this scene entirely, and not at all trying to blot out every single glimmer of light coming from the screen.
I love it.
I think that's why I think that's why I'm into it. I would hate it if you stopped getting that feeling of, it's so physical, right? Like it's something, it's so rare that any kind of art will give you such an immediate physical feeling. And I would hate to lose that because that's half the enjoyment. It's like, it's watching something and it works. Like sometimes I think even it annoys me if I'm watching something that I think is bad and just, I won't mention anything because I always feel like it's bad to badmouth specific titles. But like, I've obviously like seen every year you see some shitty horror films. Mm-hmm. And it sometimes really annoys me that they still have that effect on me because like, this feels cheap. I'm annoyed that I'm unsettled. But when it's good, it's like, oh man, like I am, like, I don't know, at risk of sounding like an awful art school student, like I am kind of communing with the work right now, like I'm like, I'm where there is a real physical relationship between me and the thing I'm seeing. And there are just few genres that can really do that.
I agree 100%.
So I get really scared, and it's part of what I really love about it.
Hell yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about Gabriel's pick.
When you pick up some scratches, cause you want a fun break, the playful way you scratch is the next choice you should make. You can make your dog's leg kick and scratch with that. You could even grab a laser pointer and use your cat. You can build yourself a homemade scratching machine or use a piece from your chess set. Go ahead, grab the queen. Scratch like a DJ with your record player. A cactus could scratch off that scratchable layer. Cause when it comes to scratching, there's a million playful ways. Thanks to scratchers from the California Lottery, a little play can make your day.
Please play responsibly. Must be 18 years or older to purchase, play, or claim.
It's easy to get lost in the latest true crime podcast or your favorite binge-worthy show. But what about your own story? That's the most important story of all, and therapy helps you write it. BetterHelp Therapy is 100% online and designed to be convenient and flexible enough to squeeze in between the next episode on your list. Get started today at betterhelp.com/pause for 10% off your first month.
And we're back. Okay, Gabriel, what film did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
Speaking of terrifying.
So, in line with what I was talking about before with my grandmother and with the sort of history that Mel Brooks has in my family, I picked Dracula Dead and Loving It.
Hell yeah.
And the reason is because I actually think it's the first time I remember being really freaked out by a movie. My parents,
Wait,
spent a lot of my...
One second. I'm going to read the synopsis super quick before we jump into
sure,
it.
sure, of course.
All right, cool. Everybody.
This synopsis, by the way, is this IMDb?
Oh, yeah. A
This is
copy and
perfect.
paste job. Copy and
This
paste.
is perfect.
Dapper Count Dracula, played by Leslie Nielsen, relocates from his Transylvanian castle to Victorian London with his assistant Renfield in search of new blood. He finds it in a pair of beautiful young women, Mina, and her best friend, Lucy. When Mina's straight-laced fiancé Jonathan notices his future bride's odd behavior, he calls in his mentor, vampire hunter Van Helsing, to save the day.
IMDb.
And this is directed by Mel Brooks, everybody. So, you should know what to expect here.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you started a little bit, but take us back. How did you see this? Why is this your Scarred for Life pick? And why is this really silly horror comedy a movie that traumatized you?
So I spent a lot of my childhood staying at my grandmother's house, not through any sort of neglect on my parents' part, but just that they were busy and fortunate enough to have a grandparent that really liked taking care of me that much. And one night, my grandmother and I go down to rent a movie together, and she sees this and is like, "Oh my God, we should rent this." Like, because it's Mel Brooks. She loved Mel Brooks. She went to see, when my dad was projecting them in the 70s, she went to see them over and over again because he'd let her in for free, obviously. And she's like, "It's a really funny movie. You're going to love it." I just have like this distinct recollection of her taking I don't know what it was like in the US, but in Denmark, like, you wouldn't have actual VHS boxes. You would have these like little, like, kind of like plastic covers that you would take down.
Yes.
And I remember seeing her taking that down, this like little laminated sheet, really. And I was like, okay, that looks kind of scary. And she's like, "Don't worry, it's not scary. It's funny. It'll be funny." And so we watch it. And I now, in retrospect, realize that I think at 6 I would have been. I don't know, like, you get that some things are funny, but I don't know if you get irony, right? Like, I don't know if you fully get that something is funny because it's not really the thing it's purporting to be or it's pretending to be, which is like kind of like, it's like there's this really specific distinction between the two. So we start watching it, and I'm like, I don't know if, and also like it's in English, and I'm not, getting most of it, right? Like, so I'm like, I don't know if this is funny, Grandma. And she's like, no, it's funny. And she's laughing at certain stuff and not laughing at others because, I also probably didn't clock, I almost certainly didn't clock at the time, but like, this isn't Mel Brooks' finest work, I think. But
I will disagree with you there, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Let's use a more objective term. Like, it's not his most critically lauded work.
No, it definitely is not. I was looking at Rotten Tomatoes, and it's at 11%. Yes.
But then, like, this very specific thing happens where, like, Dracula in, the form of Leslie Nielsen shows up, and his shadow, which I think is either a Dracula or a Nosferatu reference or both, like, crawls towards Peter McNichol's character. And I was watching it in preparation for it. I remember it so distinctly. It freaked me out that I had to leave my grandmother's apartment and run out into the landing.
Oh, no.
And she was like, it's okay, come back, it's okay, see. And then she showed me the bit after where, like, the shadow, I think, like, kind of falls and hits itself. And I was like, okay, like, I got that was funny.
Yeah.
But then there's, like, this scene where these, like, women vampires come in and try to suck Peter McNichol's blood. And again, this is meant to be like a sex joke, but I'm 6, so it's like a sex joke in a different language. I'm not getting any of this at all. To me, it's just scary. Like, they're in the bed and it looks like they're trying to eat him or something. I run back out on the landing. Really, it's okay. And we do this dance back and forth throughout the entire film. But the thing is, I still laugh at the bits that I get are funny. Like, some of them are just, like, really clear physical comedy. And that's, like, I remember distinctly thinking, this is funny. But whenever there was anything, like, just on that knife edge, like, when they're, like, driving the stake through Lucy's heart, there's blood everywhere, freak me the fuck out. Do not get that that's meant to be funny at all. Like, that is a lot of blood. That is scary. What are they doing?
Well, and also, like, I'm assuming at the age of 6, you had never seen another Dracula movie, like, understood any of the references, like, to, like, as even, like, the, Coppola's Dracula jokes that they're making. Like, there's so many levels of, like you said, irony and jokes happening that as a 6-year-old, you're like, this is just a fucking vampire. Like, it's just scary.
Exactly, to the point where, like, I then, watched Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula when I was, like, 12 or something, or 11, and I'm like, oh, that was a joke. Oh, okay, I get it now.
Terry had that moment recently, actually, because he only recently saw Bram Stoker's Dracula. I was like, oh my god, that's what they're making fun of in Dracula Dead and loving it. I'm like, I love that you saw that before Coppola's Dracula.
I did the same thing with Young Frankenstein and the later seeing James Whale's Frankenstein. Like, I saw them at a really young age, and those I got were comedies because I think it was going to be like 8. It's so funny. Like, at that point, like a single year or 2 years will have a crucial, crucial difference in sort of your understanding of like layers of humor and irony. But like, I remember seeing that and getting that, and those are like all jokes. But I didn't see James Whale's movies until 13 maybe or something like that. And again, I was like, oh, that was the bit. Like, that was like when Peter Boyle sits and like the girl like flies into the pond. Like, oh, that was the bit where they were like, I see. But yeah, so it really freaked me out. And then it did this weird thing where, like, I guess at some level I must have already then been so like into the being scared that like a few times I had my parents rent it for me again, and I was still run out at all the scary bits.
Yeah.
But I think there was something about that, like, endorphin rush of being frightened by something, even something that now as an adult I can see like, oh, this isn't even remotely supposed to be scary, right? Like, but having that feeling, I think I got really into it and sort of wanted to mimic it more throughout my life.
What I'm hearing is that young Gabriel understood the brilliance of this movie, and it kept pulling you back to it. That is what I am hearing here.
I think you are right. I think you have done what many shrinks have failed to, and you have really pinpointed.
We've cracked it.
What this was all about.
We've understood it. So after you watched it, were you scared after? Like, were you thinking about it a lot? Did it were you scared of it? Go to sleep or anything?
I don't remember if I was scared to go to sleep as much as like I remember thinking a lot about it and being freaked out about the sort of the mere ideas of some of it. Like, so like I remember thinking like, kind of apropos Hereditary, like there's that scene where he's like hiding in the ceiling. Again, not supposed to be scary at all, but to me there's something so freaky about, oh my god, like there can be like someone stuck to the ceiling and like waiting to bite me,
Please tell me you started sleeping with garlic in the room.
Well, I mean, like I grew up with like a family so addicted to garlic that I felt like pretty safe anyway. Like my mom, whenever she would cook, before she even decided what to cook, she would peel about 24 cloves of garlic because she knew that regardless of what it was, she'd probably need all of them.
A woman after my own heart.
There you go.
So I felt pretty safe in that regard. But yeah, I mean, it was really, really. I haven't rewatched it properly since at some point in my childhood, and it was really funny rewatching now because I still remember all the things that freaked me out, all the things that made me feel like this is really, really fucked up, and then watching it now and being like, oh, that's a bit. Like that's a straight up bit.
So I have to, and this is a good part to transition to like when we first saw it. But before we do, so rewatching it for the first time in so many years, what did you think about it?
Honestly, it actually, it's hard because I probably don't think it's his best work, if I'm being controversial here. And I don't.
I'm sorry. I agree with that. I'm sorry, Terry. I love you so much, but I agree.
And I watched like I said, I watched Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein and High Anxiety a bunch when I was a kid, and I've rewatched those several times as an adult, and I would say that they really quite hold up. Like there's like some writing and some performances there that are just remarkable. And this one I don't really necessarily feel if it holds up as strongly. But it's at the same time, it's very hard for me to watch it objectively because it was a very like sense memory like experience rewatching it. Again, at the risk of getting like a bit pretentious, but also like kind of personal. So where my grandmother lived, so she passed away like late 2017. But she was again this like really formative figure in my life, and she lived in this house that was like my childhood home, and she lived with two men for most of her life. She lived with my grandfather, and then she also lived with Finn, whom she met in the 60s, who's my grandfather's very close friend, and then they fell in love. And at some point, they sort of decided best way to live to make this work with it, they would just all move in together. And so Finn bought, for what was then chump change, he bought like a tiny little walk-up in a working class part of Copenhagen, and they each had their little apartment.
Oh, wow.
And I grew up in that house. Like that's where I hurt my shoulder. But that's also just like, I would go there after school to do homework and I loved being there so much. And the thing about the sort of the throuple of it all, I didn't even really clock until it was like 11 or 12. I would go and stay there. And I would always stay in my grandmother's room when I was there, in my grandmother's apartment. And I would wake up, and some mornings she would, I would wake up and she'd be having breakfast in my grandfather's apartment. And some mornings I would wake up and she would be having breakfast in Finn's apartment. And I didn't really understand that until I was about 12. And I was like, okay, wow. But it was all very
that's so cool.
Yeah, it was
so
amazing.
Rad.
Yeah, it was and it was just like a very loving household. Even my parents divorced when I was quite young. Like, I think I was barely 1. And my mom still loved coming there. Like, this is my father's family, but my mom still loved coming there and being there. It was just this house that meant it was this place where, I felt very attached to, but also we have family spread all over the world, and, everyone would come through there and we would have family parties, and it meant so much to me, that place. And so when I watched that film today, rewatching it for this, weirdly, part of the time I couldn't really focus on the movie. All I had were memories of running out into the landing between all those apartments, and like then going back into the place. And it was more of like very physical kind of memento of this place that used to mean the world to me. I mean, still does, albeit just in memory. So yeah, I also really love this movie for reasons that probably have nothing to do with the film itself.
That's amazing, though. That's such a cool story.
That's why I love movies too, of like the memories that you can, which for better or worse sometimes. But like, I feel like, especially when you're younger and you're watching movies with family members that are really, 'cause I have similar memories with my grandma, and it's just like so cool how powerful like that was the effect you have, and like the experience you have watching a movie. Like you said, like you're rewatching it and you're like, it's a totally different experience than anyone else is ever going to have watching it, and I think that's just so fucking cool.
Yeah, no, it's that thing that like, I mean, I like the literary reference is always Proust, right? It's like the Madeleine moment of like he takes a bound to Madeleine so he remembers his life. But I feel that so much with films. Like there are certain films that like the moment I like the title comes up or like I hear a certain line, I'm just put in a time and a place in my life immediately. And more so honestly than I think that I feel like a lot of people feel that way about music, but I feel it way more strongly with films. Like I had to, in prep for Attachment, because I wanted that first 10 minutes to have kind of a rom-com-y feel. I rewatched a bunch of rom-coms, and when I was like 11, I was obsessed with When Harry Met Sally. Because I just thought it was, that to me then was that was the most charming thing possible, that whole film. And there was something about, I was rewatching it, and then at the end, his speech when he runs up to her on New Year's Eve, I heard it, and the moment I heard it, I was like sitting in my dad's house, like glued against the TV, watching that scene, like being completely enamored with it. And it wasn't, it wasn't at all about the rom-com. It wasn't all about Harry or Sally. It was just like, oh yeah, that was where I was in my childhood at that exact moment. So yeah.
That's so cool. I have a similar, it's hard for me. Like I joke about it. I think this movie is a fantastic movie, but it's hard for me to think. Well, when Kayla, our PR rep, said that this was your choice, the noise I made, because one, I love this movie unabashedly. This is a comfort watch for me. This is a movie I have probably seen more than any other movie in my life, to be perfectly honest. And two, because I never thought I would ever get to cover Dracula Dead and Loving It on a podcast where we're talking about a movie that scarred a kid for life. So like the fact that it was like a twofer at this point, I'm like, yes. And I was so excited. But it's hard for me to be objective about this film. I saw it in the movie theater when I was 14, when it came out. Perfect time to go see this movie. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe this might have been my first Mel Brooks movie. So this was my introduction to him. And it was because of this that I went and I searched out all of his previous films. Some of the not so great ones, like Robin Hood Men in Tights, but also Blazing Saddles, which I still do not like. It's not, I know that's like blasphemy, but it's not my cup of tea. Young Frankenstein, which I think is absolutely fabulous.
Okay.
The History of the World.
I was about to be really concerned for a second. What you're about to say is about to really... We've been friends for years, but...
What's the big deal?
Young Frankenstein is shit. This movie is far superior.
Oh my God.
No.
Hot takes.
I'm kidding.
Anyway.
But yeah, so like all the Spaceballs, you name it.
Yeah.
History of the World, even though I wasn't technically allowed to see it because it was rated R, I still found a way to get it. Like I watched all of his movies, and I'm a huge fan. I really enjoy Mel Brooks. But I think I think that one of the reasons that this movie might not be looked at so fondly is because it does look cheap. But I will say that I think that is intentional in a lot of ways, because a lot of it feels like it is taking back from the early Universal Monster Dracula, where a lot of it was just, it looked like a play. It looked like it was a stage play, and there was a lot of soundstage type stuff. So I think it's pulling from that. I also think that what probably hurt it is that it's coming from a lush production of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is immaculately designed. And so then 3 years later, we're getting this parody ostensibly about that movie. And it does look cheap. It looks kind of inexpensive. But I think that the people that are attached to this are giving their all for a movie that is not, it doesn't really need the kind of intensity that people bring to their roles. I think well, I mean, Leslie Nielsen, icon. But I think for Peter McNichol steals this movie.
It's amazing because he actually delivers, and I don't even think it's just on a comedy level. He delivers a more unhinged performance than Tom Waits does in the Coppola one. Like as Renfield, like he's like way more like visceral and out there.
Yes, and I think like you could see this as sort of like maybe a recreation of his role that he did in Ghostbusters, like less than a decade earlier, because in that he's in Ghostbusters 2, where he's like the assistant to the painting god, and he's like the museum curator.
Oh my God, he is, isn't he?
Yeah. He works with is it Sigourney Weaver?
And Sigourney Weaver. Yes. He kidnaps Sigourney Weaver. Yeah. So he's kind of like iterating on that performance, but he is taking it to a whole new level. And every single time he is on film, I am just smiling from ear to ear, because his like the lines that he delivers, when you talked about the scary moment of when the women are like floating into his room, and I quote that all the time. He's like, "What are you doing to the furniture?" Followed up by like, "This is wrong, and then wrong me, my brains." It's so silly and it's so absurd, but it never fails to bring a smile to my face. So every single time I'm like in a bad mood or I'm sad or something, I will probably pop this on and I will be happy by the end of it, because it brings me back to a time and place. And it's sort of like what you're talking about, just like that kind of muscle memory of seeing this. And it's, again, the score to this movie is better than it has any right to be. That opening theme with the credits and stuff, it's bringing me to like, it kind of reminds me of Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, but it's so lush and it's so, I don't know, gothic, that I'm just like, this movie does not deserve this score.
Right. And I think there's a weird, it's funny hearing you talk about it is also bringing out a lot of things that I really did appreciate about watching it. And part of it is like, I think the thing that maybe at the time had felt cheap now seems inconceivably expensive, right? Like hand painted backdrops.
Yeah. Matte paintings. And
yeah, you'd never get that. I'm watching it now. I was like, oh my God, that's like old movie. Like I love that. Mm-hmm. You know,
and that's something I appreciated, I think, watching it again. So I actually watched it for the first time a couple months. How long ago? I can't even remember.
Probably
how long.
Like
a year?
Half a year ago.
I watched it for the first time because we were covering horror comedies on like another little podcast, and I watched this and was like, okay, like I get it. I don't think it's as smart as some of his other movies, but I also and I also love it because Terry loves it so much. So I think that like gives me a deep appreciation for it. But it really it emulates the Universal /Hammer monster movie aesthetic so well, that are like look really pretty, but also kind of cheap if you look a little too hard at it. And like, even just like when they are putting the garlic in Mina's room, it reminds me so much of like a lesbian vampire Hammer movie that I cannot remember the title of, but it looks just like that. And I'm like, I don't know if that was what he was trying to do, but he really does nail the Hammer aesthetic vampire movie so well. And I think I appreciate that so much, and like what it's doing with the aesthetics of it all. It's funny. I just don't think it's as smart as things like Blazing Saddles. And that's fine. Like, not everything has to be smart. Like, Mel Brooks, this was this last movie he directed, right? He was just probably like, I'm fucking done being funny. Like, I'm tired. But still, I do appreciate it. It's unhinged. And I appreciate an unhinged experience so much.
It also does a thing that I really, it's a type of humor that I personally really love, and I don't think we get enough of, which is like the joke is a lot funnier the fourth time you tell it than the first time you tell it.
Yes, the repetition.
She will become one herself. What? She will become one herself.
Also, like the faux Romanian they speak was like Varush or whatever they keep saying.
Yes.
Or like Mel Brooks' accent, like Brooklyn accent, comes through so much too. It's so good. I was like, I love it. He's so. I
mean, I was even listening to some of that. I was like, some of those words are Yiddish. Like some of those words are 100% Yiddish. But also, there's so many. I mean, the garlic joke is sort of almost its own version of it. Where like there's just so much garlic. There's just the sheer abundance. The sight gag of the abundance of garlic is so good.
It's so
good.
And
or when he sticks his head in the window and he's like, ooh, because there's so much garlic.
My favorite joke this time was when he said, I'm also a gynecologist. Oh, I didn't know you had your hand in that too. Like, they're so dumb. Like, they're such like kind of like base jokes. I still laughed. I don't care. Like, there's still something funny about just like the subtlety of it. Like, oh, I didn't know you had your hand in that. Goes to the next thing, and you're like, wait, I'm sorry. What did you like? It's something about, and I don't watch nearly enough comedies anymore. So like, it was very refreshing just to watch something that's just unabashedly silly as shit, and it's just so fun.
So dumb. Even the like enema joke, the Harvey Korman joke, and like the first time you're like, okay, and the second time you're like, it's pretty fun. By the fourth time, he like refers to an enema, like, okay, great, yes.
Or when he's like deciding when to give an enema, no, give him an enema, put him in the straitjacket, then give him an enema. It'll give him a sense of purpose or something like that. It's like the permutation on that. And I'll be honest, that sent me on like a Google spiral. I was like, do people use enemas? Like,
I was like, what's about to come out of your mouth, Terry?
I was like, what is his obsession with enemas? And I was like, is there like a historical like joke here, you know, of like hospitals using that to cure? And I couldn't find anything. I think
it's probably just a butt joke. I think it's just kind of an immature butt joke, unfortunately.
I'm thinking way too in depth about the enema joke and Dracula Dead Loving.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah.
But it's funny because like I'm just realizing now as we're talking. So I had in Attachment, there's this scene in a forest, and there's like this joke that's made like 4 times about like what a strange, like it's a really weird place to meet. And when we were shooting that scene, I went out to David, who had to do the bit, and he was like, I mean, you're really repeating this joke a lot of times. And I was like, no, but I don't think you get it. Like, it's not really funny until the 4th time. Like, it's only kind of funny. It's the 4th time you say it that it'll be really funny. And I'm realizing now, I was like, yeah, that's what they're doing in Dracula Dead Loving. Like, all the best jokes they're really hitting home the 4th or 5th time they make it.
Hell yeah. The psychic impact this movie had on you, and you didn't even know it.
Me entirely.
Well, and I had brought this up when Mary Beth had said we have like a little mini-sode that we do where we talk about various movies we watch, whatever. And I remember when we watched this movie, and I just lost what I was going to say. Wow. Just went gone.
Love that.
But there are moments in here that I think, that's what it was. This movie, I think, has defined kind of like my idea of humor. I have a very weird sense of humor, but like, a lot of times when I watch a movie that's funny, I'll be like, oh, that's funny. I'll like admit that it's funny, but I won't laugh. Like, it's so weird. Unless I'm in like a communal experience, like in a movie theater, if everyone's laughing, I will probably join on. But if I'm watching something by myself, I will hardly ever laugh. But afterwards, I'll be like, that was a really funny movie, but I won't have laughed at all. But like, there are certain things, it's absurdity. This takes the idea of like a joke to the most absurd level. So it's not just like a joke about Van Helsing grossing out his assistants. He is pulling out, organs. He is putting a brain in someone's hand. Like, it is just like, it takes it to as far as it possibly can go. But there's also like moments of reversal of expectations where like when Renfield is in the asylum and the flap opens up in the door and he's like, Renfield, how are you doing? He's like, I can't take it anymore. The walls are closing in on me. I've got to get out of here. And it turns out he's a guard. Like, it's so funny because you assume he's like another patient there. And no, he's just a guard that's like, I can't take it anymore. But so there's that, or it's like the line where Dracula is staring at Lucy's bosom, but he's like, you have such a lovely occipital mapillary, like, and it's this little moment, this little part where like the collarbone is open, and so there's just like these little tiny things that I think are just like, you don't expect it to happen, and he manages to like pull that rug out and just make it something that it's not. And I think that is something that this movie doesn't get a lot of credit for.
No, I think that's true, and I also think like, I mean, I'm really into like the whole like reappreciation aspect of this conversation, because like I do think that it does a lot of things more sharply than I probably got credit for at the time, because it also sort of, I mean, even like near the end, right, when the bat has been fried into ashes and he like scoops it up and he puts it onto and then he does a smiley, which I thought, watching that now, that bit I was like, that is genius. That is cackling. So good.
I was cackling very hard at that.
You're starting to look like your old self again.
Part of it works so well about it, and I think maybe this sort of ties into why, in this sort of fun psychoanalytical session that we're having now, this maybe has been like a really formative experience for me. Like, the reason that joke works so well is that it actually feels weirdly genuine. Like, there's something like really weirdly like humanly sad about him like making that smiley in the ashes, like carefully scooped up on. And I think the whole film, at least especially as I experienced it then, that feeling of experiencing as though it was genuinely scary when it was scary, even though that, I now see that wasn't the point, and then genuinely funny when it's trying to be funny, which it was trying to be. I think a lot of the films that I've come to love, and something that I sort of tried to do with like the Attachment, my first feature as well, is like film horror among them, but mall films, like, you can actually kind of get away with doing a bunch of things at once if you really mean every bit of it, right? Like, like if you want, like the great horror comedies, for instance, have that quality. Like I guess most recently, something like Barbarian has that quality. Like, it is extremely funny when it is funny, and it is extremely scary when it is scary, and it really means it when it is both. And while my experience of Dracula Didn't Let Me Get may have been, not fully representative of Mel Brooks' intentions, that was how I felt watching it. And that moment near the end with that little smiley, I still feel that feels weirdly genuine. Like, that is a truly weird emotional beat at the end, and that's what makes it so funny.
Yeah, I think there's a sense of earnestness to this movie. Yeah. I think that there is a genuine love of the vampire film and a genuine love of Universal, Hammer, and Coppola's version of Dracula that I think comes through in here. And I think that genuineness is what I think probably, it immediately pulled me, even though I couldn't put words to it as a kid, because this could have been, let's face it, this could have been just a cheapo production of like, and them not even trying, let's just quickly get a parody of Dracula out there, and people just go see it. No one ended up going to see this, but that's a completely different story. But I think there is a sense of genuineness here that I think comes out in the performances. I think everyone is trying their hardest to do the performance. In fact, this was the first time that I've actually appreciated Steven Weber's performance in a movie, because his Harker, his vocal mannerisms, like there's that part. First of all, I love that he represents this sort of idea of Victorian England where it was like everyone is so repressed, and so we can't have any. And
having lived in London for a long time, modern England as well. But yes.
But I love how like all the men are completely stupid in this movie. All the women are voluptuous, and
So a Hammer
discovering
movie.
sexuality.
Yeah.
Or, to that degree, Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, where the men are completely useless and the women are talking about, sex and like having all these kind of sexual fantasies and reading a book on Kama Sutra and that kind of stuff. Like there is that dichotomy here that I think is so it's a more of a subtle part of it. But the fact that like he is talking, there's like a quote that I wrote down when we first meet Harker. He's talking about the opera is fraught with love, hate, sensuality, and bridal passion. All the things in my life I've managed to suppress. Like the way he delivers that line, and then later how uncomfortable he is around Lucy when she is being very, sexually aggressive toward him. And he makes this like, like sound that I cannot get right. But he does that a couple times toward the end. He does that when Lucy first comes on to him. And then after he has driven the stake through her bloody heart and is filled with geysers of blood, and he makes that sound again. It's just, I'm like, this guy is actually doing a really great job in this movie.
That's true. And also I think, like, in terms of what you're saying, that everyone's giving their all, like, everyone actually genuinely seems to be having fun. Like, that whole, like, kind of cottage industry in the 90s, and then again, like, a new version of it in the 2000s where everything had to be a spoof, right? Like, a lot of those, especially when you watch them now, you're like, oh man, like, people are just really needing a paycheck here. But everyone watching this, everyone actually seems to be having fun. I think everyone seems to be a little bit thrilled about being in a Mel Brooks movie, like there's like, and I think some of the things that we also experience maybe as like cheap or low budget, some of it also just has like kind of a vaudevillian quality to it, right? Like it's sort of, it has like kind of a Borscht Belt kind of dumb zinger after dumb zinger, but it's sort of charming and fun to watch. And I think, again, maybe I might need a bit more time with it before I can say that I think it's a good movie, sort of in a sort of qualitative sense. Yeah. But it's a really enjoyable movie. Yeah. And a lot of those movies a lot of those spoof movies from the 90s, like, don't necessarily have that quality.
No. Yeah, exactly.
No, they don't. But I will say, I think there are a couple deep cuts in this. Like, I love, first of all, Anne Bancroft shows up as I will shield you from the lurking danger. I love that. But I love that her name is Madam.
You gotta do a one-man show of just the entire movie of Dracula Dead and Loving It.
Here's the thing. As I was taking notes for this movie, I was literally writing the quotes down before they were said.
Yeah, of course you were. You nerd.
That is how much I know this movie. I was literally writing lines down. I was like, did I get this line right? And then they say, like, yep, I got it right. Like, that is literally... I don't know what that says about me, but like that is literally how I view this movie. But she's kind of a deep cut character, dude, because her name is Madam Ospinkaya or something like that. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce her last name, and they only say it once. But that is an homage to Maria Ospinkaya, who was an actress, a Russian actress that she was in Hollywood films, but she played kind of the Romani fortune teller in The Wolfman, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman.
Wow.
In like a bunch of like The Rains Came, Waterloo Bridge. Like she was a famous like Russian actress, but she played a lot of the Romani fortune teller type roles. Huh. And so that's kind of a deep cut there that her name is not even mentioned once. It's not even brought up attention. And it's just like there. So like, that there is a deep love for Universal monster movies.
Oh, that's great. I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's such a cool factoid. And also another example of like the joke is even funnier the second time she does it. Like it's such a good
yes. Or the repeating of scheduled.
Yes.
Scheduled?
I was watching it. It's funny. I was watching it with captions because I've gotten into that habit of doing that now with most things.
Me too. Oh yeah, same.
And it sort of spelled out schedule in this weird way. I was like, why did it spell out schedule that way? And then the joke came, and for some reason it just made it funnier. Like it set up the joke even more for me.
But what did you think on a second watch?
Well, it's probably realistically it's more like my fourth or fifth, but it's my first time watching it since I can't have been more than 8 or 9 since I last saw it. Like, yeah. So in any meaningful sense, yeah, probably my second time watching it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, again, so there was that whole sense memory aspect of it. Like watching it was a lot of an experience of like being transported to another place, another time. I think I have grown with age. I have grown such a fondness for that kind of vaudevillian quality. Like I think if I'd watched this 8 years ago I think I would have been like, oh, this is like a lesser Mel Brooks movie, and like every joke is so like loud and silly. And watching it now, I'm like, I am kind of into. There's an old world quality to this that I miss and that I really enjoyed tapping into watching it. And then I just noticed myself also appreciating, like we said, like again, like hand painted backdrops and like the feeling like I know that this isn't very fashionable. I really love it when I watch a movie and I can tell that it's on a set. And that's not because my own movie was on a set, because that one I'd ideally have people not notice. But I love that quality. I love it when movies feel like movies. And in some way, it's an incredibly old-fashioned movie, right? Like for a film that came out in like the mid-90s, it already feels so old for its time. And that I think is that's like a feature, not a bug. It makes it feel really romantic. And it makes all those very old school jokes feel really at home in it. And so, I think, again, hard for me to necessarily say that I think it's a qualitatively good film, but it has a lot of qualities that it put a big smile on my face watching it. Like, I would like to see more films like it, even whether or not it's a good movie, you know?
And Mary Beth, I know this is your second time watching this movie.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. What did you have any thoughts on this watch now that you've seen it and it's like you kind of know what to expect?
So I think something that, and it's actually kind of like Gabriel, as you're talking about it, like I keep forgetting it was made in 1995. I keep thinking it is made in like the 80s or the 70s. Like the look of it is very retro. And again, like it looks like those Hammer movies. So I think that is a really interesting aspect to it, that I think it hits that aesthetic really well. And if you aren't as familiar with that aesthetic, it's going to go over your head. And like we've talked about, look cheap. And like, I think that's part of the charm of this, though. Like, I think it's trying to both make fun of the opulence of the previous one while also paying homage to what sets looked like in these Hammer horror films when like Dracula was Christopher Lee and the blood looked like orange rather than red. And like it was kind of cheesy but also really beautiful, and there was just something about the quality of it, and that is so special. That makes me love Hammer movies even now, even though a lot of them are dated. Like there's something about them that are so beautiful, like, and they have such like a strong aesthetic point of view, if you will. And so watching this movie capture that in a way that I don't think I've really seen in other films, because I don't think a lot of films tackle like the Hammer horror aesthetic at all, and I wish they did. I really do wish they did, because I think it is such a cool aesthetic you can play with. But I think that's something I really appreciated so much more this time around. I kind of knew when the jokes were coming, or kind of like knew the jokes. So I wasn't as paying much attention to the sense of humor rather than that, as well as kind of, and I just watched Dracula. We watched Bram Stoker's Dracula recently. So that was like on the top of my head too. So I was doing more like side, comparisons to that, because Bram Stoker's Dracula is one of my favorite movies. So yeah.
It's also kind of an amazing movie. Like I think Bram Stoker's Dracula has this, it has one of those like big swing qualities. And like some people feel it's a big swing and a miss. Some people feel it's a big swing and a hit. But like it has this thing of like, it's such an ambitious, wild and huge, like crazy, it also went notoriously over budget and over schedule and everything. But I think they're a fun counterpoint in that sense as well, right? Like one of them is like this work of absolute excess, and the other one is like, we're gonna really nail what feels like this kind of very like pared back quality, but they're sort of related in this weird deeper sense as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think that going back to kind of what you were saying, Mary Beth, and what I said earlier in the episode, I think that maybe the kind of attention to detail of the 1930s and the 1970s Dracula movie might have kind of bit it in the butt a bit, because if you look at it, the budget for this movie was big. It was $30 million. It's a $30 million picture.
That's $90, right? So that's
that's $90. Yeah. So $30 million in 1995. And yeah, I mean, you could say that there's like a lot of cast members that were I don't know how big they were, but like Steven Weber was having like success in the 90s. Leslie Nielsen had done all the spoofs in like the late 80s, early 90s as well. So I'm not sure how much of it went to like paychecks or whatnot, but that is a huge budget for something that does not look very expensive. You know what I mean? And I think that was an intention on Mel Brooks' part, because he wanted to, again, represent those earlier Dracula films. And so part of me is like, gosh, I wonder what this would have looked like if you had just made a parody of Bram Stoker's Dracula and you went with opulence, but then you had that kind of humor. I'm wondering what that would have looked like. But I honestly think that a lot of the kind of fly by the seat of your pants design of this movie was intentional in a way. But I know we're getting close to wrapping up, but there's two jokes we haven't really touched on, two sequences that I think are my absolute favorite. And one, so a little backstory. My roommate, her name is Cass. She has a dog. His name is Riggins. He's a terrier corgi mix, and he is a grumpy old man. And when people come to the door or packages get dropped off and like he doesn't see them, he will make the sound like, and then he'll be like, and he'll go studding down the stairs to go like, oh, those angry kids are get off my lawn, like, then he'll start barking at the door. But the noise he makes before that is a sort of, and every single time he does it, I always think back to the raspberry scene with Renfield and Dr. Seward, because Dr. Seward has this sort of like, raspberries? We're not serving raspberries. But he makes that sound, and it sounds just like Riggins' sound of annoyance that I will, anytime he does that, I will probably start quoting this movie, because it brings me back to seeing this movie as a kid and just laughing at Dr. Seward's very like mannerisms. And that scene, I think, is a perfect scene that encapsulates my sense of humor of the like absurdity taken to the nth degree. Because he's grabbing spiders, he's grabbing crickets, he's going to get grasshoppers off the ground, and he's trying to pass it off as like a raspberry or as, you know, a raisin or something. And it's just it's so fucking silly that I love it.
That is actually a genuinely like amazing physical comedy sequence, especially when he throws the fork.
Yes.
But also because like this, like the commitment to the bit of like, you know, like a lot of comics be like, oh, okay, but like Harvey Korman actually goes like, no, you didn't. I saw you tossing on the ground.
I saw you. You did that.
And I think that's what makes it so funny is that he is playing it dead serious. He is playing Dr. Seward as if he is like Watson from the old Sherlock Holmes movies. Is sort of like, that is who he is. He is enveloping in this character, but he is playing it dead serious as Peter McNichol is doing his damnedest
like
to be
grasshopper leg dangling out of his mouth. He's fighting for his life.
It's just that absurdity mixed with like a character that is trying to be as earnest and as like, no, I'm being method. I am being here and I'm taking this seriously. That's what it comes across as. Well, Peter McNichol is like, just what can I do to be fucking insane over here?
What can I do to make him break?
Yeah, basically.
Is your second bit that you want to highlight, is that the one, because otherwise I will do it now, the one where he's like trying to throw them off the scent?
Where he's what? I'm sorry?
Where Peter McNichol's trying to throw everyone off the scent, like, are they going to try to follow me? And it just like,
I love that.
And stops. Yeah.
Awesome.
Stops, runs to another little bit, stops, runs another bit, there. Lost them.
It's so
beautiful physical comedy.
That scene. No, I actually should include that scene. I completely went out of my train of thought. But no, the one that I was thinking of is when Dracula is trying to get, I think it's Mina, out of her bed, and the nurse is there.
God. Sit up.
And he hypnotizes both of them.
Sit down.
Mina, you are in the closet. Go back.
And he like leaves with the nurse reels everything when he actually leaves a minute, he like runs through the whole bit pretty quickly.
But it's the physical comedy of him being like trying to mentally control two people, and none of them are doing what he wants. He's like, come to the door, and so the nurse, no, not you, stand, and then they both stand, and it's so dumb, but it is played so well that it's one of my favorite scenes.
Hell yeah. All right. Well, shall we wrap up and give this our rating out of 5, Terry?
Yeah. I honestly could talk about this movie all night long.
So, Terry, how many raspberries do you give Dracula Dead? I'm loving it.
5.
Shocking.
I love this movie so much. And I understand that it's not everyone's cup of tea. And I understand that for a lot of people, this is not top tier Mel Brooks. But for me, this is his best movie.
I love the tape. I appreciate the tape.
And I can't be objective about it. It's something that I saw as a 14-year-old that I fell in love with and was constantly renting it at Blockbuster all the time. I would watch it over and over and over again. I probably wore out at least one copy of Blockbuster's tapes with this because I loved it so much. And over years, it has become my comfort film that I will go back to whenever I'm feeling down or if I need to pick me up, or if I'm not doing anything, like I'm just going to throw a movie on. It will probably be this movie because I don't know. There's something about it that it speaks to me. So I'm so glad you brought this. This is a 5 raspberries movie for me. I love it. What about you, Mary Beth? Don't give it a 1, please.
No, I'm going to give it a 3. A 3 raspberries because it's not my favorite Mel Brooks movie, but I really, really do love, especially if you're talking about it, like love what it is a little bit ahead of its time and what it is trying to what it is trying to spoof, or maybe it's too much in the past. Maybe that's a better way to put it. Like it is going maybe too far back in the 90s for people to fully appreciate. Like Hammer horror just feels so niche to me. Like even in the 90s, and and we've talked about that, but like just thinking about that and appreciating it makes this a special movie, and I love how much Terry loves it. But I love Leslie Nielsen. I just think he is like the dumbest, funniest dude. So seeing him take like this sexy figure of Dracula and make him an absolute buffoon is just incredible. And like he does it in the best way because he has like a suave vibe, but also a very chaotic one, and it fits making Dracula into a buffoon very much. And so, yeah, I'm gonna give it 3.
2 quick points though. One,
oh my god, are you fighting me right now? Are you fighting?
No. What you said just reminded me of 2 things that like I absolutely love about this. There's the line where he says, "Yes, I like it," where Peter McNichol is like, "Oh, dusty, isn't it?" And he's like, "Yes, I like it." I will find myself saying, "Yes, I like it" to the most random things when people say something to me. That's just what popped in my head. And the other thing, I love how unabashedly they do not care that there is a stuntman playing him when he's like doing the dance. Like his face is in full view, and it's obviously not Leslie Nielsen. Like not even trying to like mask his face. It is like that man is not Leslie Nielsen, and he is throwing this woman around. Anyway, sorry, Mary Beth.
Well, Gabriel, sorry, it's raspberries.
No. Yes. Right. Sorry. Yes. Oh, in terms of just like off the Leslie Nielsen thing. Also, something I realized I actually appreciate about it is like it's not that Leslie Nielsen plays his other like in The Naked Gun or things like that. He plays his roles straight necessarily, but like he has a delivery in a way that I think he starts out doing in Airplane, which is like weirdly kind of the comedy lies in how plain his delivery is of the lines compared to how weird everything going on is, you know, and like part of what makes him such a great like bumbling idiot in the Naked Gun movies is that he weirdly plays it shockingly straight, except for when there's physical comedy.
A straight man, but not like it's so weird.
And then in Dracula, like all that goes out the window, and he's like got an accent, and it's all like really big and flamboyant. And I think that's something I really appreciate about it. So in terms of how many, I don't know if I can deliver the raspberries. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah,
raspberries.
Raspberries. I think for reasons that I don't know if have much to do with the film itself, I'm going to have to give it 5 as well, because I don't know how I could give it 4 or 3 or 2. And I definitely don't want to give it 1. But there's it awoken too many things in me watching it. And there's something about it that even just talking about it makes me appreciate it so much more, that giving it anything short of 5 just seems dishonest at this point. Even if just like on an emotional level. So
hell yeah.
I'll take that because I know my 5 is an emotional level too. So I'll take that. Thank you so much, Gabriel, for joining us and bringing
absolute pleasure.
Dracula Done Loving It to us. Where can our listeners find you? Are you on social media? And do you have anything that you can talk about or share? The floor is yours.
I have no social media, which is probably a bad idea, but I've just decided to stay away from it many years ago, and I've stuck with it. It's probably not doing my career any service, but everything I'm working on right now is like in such early stages that I probably shouldn't talk too much about it. If for no other reason than out of superstition that I'll
Gotcha. Yep.
Unravel it by talking too much about it. But you can see Attachment on Shudder. And I hope that people go and do that. And then I hope that I'll return with something else for everyone to watch before too long.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. All right, listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with Dracula, Dead and Loving It? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I'm at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, we do have a Patreon with a bunch of content on there.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Somebody please think of the children! Somebody please think of the children! Somebody please think of the children!
When you pick up some scratches, cause you want a fun break, the playful way you scratch is the next choice you should make. You can make your dog's leg kick and scratch with that. You could even grab a laser pointer and use your cat. You can build yourself a homemade scratching machine or use a piece from your chest set. Go ahead, grab the queen. Scratch like a DJ with your record player. A cactus could scratch off that scratchable layer. Cause when it comes to scratching, there's a million playful ways. Thanks to scratchers from the California Lottery, a little play can make your day.
Please play responsibly. Must be 18 years or older to purchase, play, or claim.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.